His Italian mother called him Mark after the Gospel of Mark and its writer, hoping that he too would amount to something. But the 13th century Europeans found it impossible to believe Mark's tale of faraway lands. He claimed that when he was 17 years of age, he took an epic journey that lasted a quarter of a century, taking him across the steppes of Russia, the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, the wastelands of Persia, and over the top of the world, the Himalaya mountains. He was the first European, we believe, who ever entered China. And through an amazing set of circumstances, he became the favorite of the most powerful ruler on the planet, the Kublai Khan. Mark saw cities that made European capitals look like roadside villages. The Khan's palace dwarfed the largest castles and cathedrals in Europe. It was so massive that the banquet room could hold 6,000 people at dinner at one time, all of them eating off of plates of gold. Mark was the first person from Europe who ever saw paper money and who marveled at the explosive power of gunpowder. It would be the 18th century before Europe would manufacture as much steel as China was producing in 1267. And he became the first Italian to ever taste that beautiful Chinese cuisine invented in China called pasta. As an officer of Kublai Khan's court, he traveled to places no European would see for another 500 years. After serving Kublai Khan for 17 years, Mark began his journey home to Venice, loaded down with gold, silk, and spices. Well, when Marco Polo arrived home, his people dismissed his stories of a mythical place called China. His family priest rebuked him for spinning lies. And at his deathbed, his family and friends and priests begged him to recant these fantastic tales of China. But setting his jaw and grasping for breath, his last words were, "I haven't even begun to tell you the half of it." Well, I wonder if St. John the Apostle felt that way after the vision in heaven that we just read in the scriptures a moment ago. I wonder if, grasping for words, trying to describe the indescribable, he might have said to himself or to others, I haven't begun to tell you the half of it. Well, just like Marco Polo, most people thought John to be a lunatic and a liar also. Well, Stephen Hawking thinks this way when he said, "Heaven is a fairy tale for people who are afraid of the dark." And many people today would agree with him. I just wonder if Stephen Hawking wants to believe, but he feels it's just too good to be true. I don't know, but that's a wonder, isn't it? Well, last week we took a giant leap by facing up to the question, is there life after death? And today we want to delve even deeper into this mystery of mysteries, asking the question, what is heaven like? Well, some people think they know the answer to that. They either think we will be obliterated entirely or will be absorbed into nature or perhaps some higher power, like a drop of rain that's absorbed in the dry earth. And even as Christians, we have to confess that while the Bible is filled with so many promises of eternal life, nevertheless, it says remarkably little about what heaven is actually like. Or even, as that great Christian writer Oswald Saunders once said, God has told us not as much as we would like, but He's told us all that we need to know. Yet, from the little we do know, we can affirm our Christian hope in Jesus. For only Jesus died and remained dead for 3 days in the tomb. Only Jesus has been there to the very throne of God and in God's ultimate presence. And not only has he been there, but he's come back to tell us all about it. So we look at the Bible and ask, what is heaven like, really? And we can begin with this affirmation. And we can say that it's a place beyond comprehension. It's utterly beyond human comprehension. Well, I had a friend. I say friend because he's gone from this world. He died a few years ago. But when I knew him a number of years ago, we were both colleague teachers at a Bible college in Newfoundland. His name is Don May, and we were fishing buddies, and we loved to canoe and fish for trout. And one day, he had a massive heart attack. He was taken to the hospital in St. John's, Grace Hospital. And his heart stopped, and he stopped breathing. And he said, I was able to look down at my own face, as if looking down from the ceiling. And then he said, I saw this bright light, and Jesus was in the light. And although he didn't make it to the light, he said, suddenly I felt a pain in my chest. And I was back in my body and my eyes open. And I asked him, Don, what was it like? What was heaven like? And he smiled with this gentle smile, this beaming face. And he said, Henry, it's the most beautiful, beautiful thing. And I can't even put in words, but I know this. Next time I die, now there's a statement in itself, isn't it? Next time I die, I won't be afraid of anything. Well, I believe him because Don was not only a sincere Christian, but a dear friend, and I know that he wouldn't lie about something as significant as that. And all this to say that even the Scriptures can only attempt to speak of that which is beyond human comprehension. So that Ezekiel, in reporting his vision in chapter 1 of his prophecy, is reduced to expressing the glory of heaven in such words as it was like or it resembles. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9, points to the same thing, saying, and quoting the Old Testament, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor can the human heart begin to imagine what God has prepared for those who love him. So then the apostle in Revelation, the apostle John, he can barely give us a glimpse of that which is beyond human words to even express. Well, that brings us to a second affirmation. Namely, heaven is a place of utter joy. Why? Because where Jesus is, joy is present. And the poet David said just that. In your presence is fullness of joy, and at your right hand there are pleasures forevermore. And also, this word paradise finds itself, can we have the next slide, please? This word paradise happens again and again in the New Testament. Jesus on the cross speaks to the dying thief and says, today you'll be in paradise with me. It reminds me of Milton's great epic poem and the two major chapters, Paradise Lost, Paradise Found. Well, even St. Paul writes to the Philippians, and you can almost hear him shout for joy, saying, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. And if heaven is the definition of joy, most people have a far different understanding. Fluffy clouds and harps. In fact, the story is told about one man who died, went to the afterlife, and he was so bored after a week that he said, if this is heaven, then somebody send me to hell. And a voice replied, well, where do you think you are now? Well, it's going to be anything but boring. So that we only have a vague notion of what it would be like. Well, sometimes children have a better understanding of this than we do. And let me say that the next affirmation about heaven is this. It's a place of continued personal identity. Personal identity. It's a place where we go on. We'll be different, but we can go on. I can hardly emphasize that too much, for many other theories would settle for something far less. They would tell us either that we're just absorbed into the higher power. Others would say, well, we're just living on in the memories of our children, but how far short that is from the truth. In the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians, Paul gives us this analogy. The analogy of a seed which dies and is planted in the earth, and that same seed sprouts into a beautiful flower or plant. Now both are one, the seed and the plant. They're one, but they're in a different form. In other words, where are you, Stuart? Stuart, you'll still be Stuart. You'll be different. And Greg, you'll still be Greg, but you'll be different. And I'll still be me, but I'll be different. Well, as I said a minute ago, some children understand this a lot better than we do. A famous scholar of theology in New York died at the untimely age of just 48 years of age. And among the mourners were a 3-year-old boy and a playmate of the man's little daughter. And the little boy was very perplexed and sad until his mom told him that Wendy's dad was now with God. Then his reply in tones of infinite wisdom and understanding, he said this, "Oh, then he's still real." In other words, he's still him. And that's the Christian hope. That life after death, we're still ourselves, our identifiable personalities. Different and yet recognizable. That leads me to the next affirmation. Heaven is a place of mutual recognition. Now that's the burning question in people's hearts when they lose somebody they've just loved. Just imagine a man walking away from the cemetery broken-hearted because he's lost the love of his life. And he asked, will I ever see her again? Will she recognize me? And the Christian hope is that we will. Neville Shute made a motion picture, or rather wrote a book that was turned into a motion picture in 1959. It was called On the Beach. It was a tale of a post-apocalyptic... I'm having trouble with my words today. It was a post-nuclear war experience. I can't say that word now. You know what I mean. After the aftermath of a nuclear war, the human race was dying. In North America and all over the world, it was a massive grave, except for one place in southern Australia. And people were awaiting the day when the wind would blow this radioactive cloud their way and they would all be dead. But they tried to live a normal life. And Commander Dwight towers in the movie played by Gregory Peck, was the last surviving officer of the U.S. Navy. And he performs his duty with courage and serene dignity. And back in America, his wife and children, like millions of others, have just fallen to the ground as if it's just one mass grave. But he doesn't think of his children as dead, but alive in a new way, growing in laughter and waiting for him to join them. He's attracted to a beautiful young woman who offers him her love, but he prefers to remain faithful to the wife that he will soon see in heaven. He goes to church every Sunday, not because of piety or because he's afraid of death, but because he's always gone to church. Because the love of God in Christ is the most real thing in his life. The love is the reality, and he awaits for that time and to meet his own again. And the last scene, he's standing on the deck, the conning tower of his sinking submarine. And he's holding in his hands those presents that he bought for his children and his wife before all this happened. Well, we have a hope that we'll see our loved ones and recognize them again, don't we? But what does the Bible say? Is this hope reasonable? How do we square it with the promise that our resurrected bodies will be so different from the bodies that we have now? I mean, will we really recognize our loved ones? Well, do you remember that when Jesus was transfigured on the mountain, he glowed like light, but there were two other figures with him. Glowing like the sun, there was Elijah and there was Moses, both of whom had died centuries before. And although the three disciples had never even seen them, they recognized and knew who they were. And then you remember that after Jesus' resurrection, he had a body, but it was different. It passed through locked doors and materialized in the upper room and then disappeared as if into thin air on the Mount of Olives. Yet the disciples recognized him. Even Paul, before his conversion or at the moment of his conversion, when a burst of blinding light knocked him to the ground, and all he could see was a blinding light, and Jesus was in the light, he recognized Jesus. Some of you may have read the book, the Pulitzer Prize novel. It was turned into a movie in 1985 called The Color Purple. Anybody ever seen it? Okay. Only 2 other people. I'm getting old. 3. Do I see another? Well, the closing scene provides us an image or a picture of what that mutual recognition in eternity might be like. 2 black sisters separated in their teenage years. One has left the southern states and gone back to Africa, the place of her roots. And then the 2 sisters meet again after a lifetime. Now both of them are old and gray and grandmothers. Well, they know each other instantly, not by sight, but by mutual intuition. One of them describes their moment of their reunion. When Nettie's foot come down on the porch, I almost died. Then both us start to moan and cry. Us totter towards one another like us did when we's babies. Then us feel so weak when us touch, we nearly knock each other down. But what us care? Us sit and lay there on the porch inside of each other's arms. And after a while she says, Seeley. And I say, Nettie. Friends, do we dare to hope that that'll be our experience when we get to heaven? We'll see. I'm looking forward to seeing my mom, to seeing my dad, seeing my aunt. Now, then the final affirmation having saved the best for last, is that heaven is a place where Jesus is. And friends, that says it all. And if we didn't know anything else about what heaven is like, that would be enough. Perhaps you have sometimes imagined what would it have been like to be with Jesus long ago when he fed the multitudes with but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Or what would it have been like to see him, to be in the boat with him when he hushed the raging seas and silenced the stormy winds with but a word? We can hardly imagine. And we long to see him. Well, we can't, looking at those past experiences, but we can, for although we could not have seen him then, someday we will. John gives us in the Revelation these words, "We shall see him just as he is." And the prophet Isaiah also, "Your eyes will see the King." And in the book of the Revelation again, we read these beautiful words. They, or may I say, you, shall see his face. Isn't that going to be wonderful? It reminds me of an old song. I shall know him. I shall know him by the prints of the nails in his hand. Well, a certain pastor believed that with all his passionate soul, and he voiced our Christian hope when he was comforting his grieving family. You see, he was dying, and he knew it. And his family drew around him, and he said to them, "Don't be sad. All my life I've been preaching the joys of heaven, and now I'm going to discover it for myself. It's going to be a great adventure." But his sense of humor didn't desert him even in that moment. He said, "You'll be all right, and when I get there, I'll send you my address." Thanks be to God.